Okay. As per usual, it's our old habits, checking to make sure that the live stream's doing okay. And I think we're good. Okay. So, welcome back, guys. Today, we're going to be doing the 55th podcast. I know it's been a long time since I've done one of these. It's been a long time since I've been heard of for a while. And I was going to go over a couple of that before we get off to the main topic today. But the main topic is going to be about finding your voice. A large part as to why today's topic has come to the forefront of, I guess, my own internal discussion is because I've had a lot of people in the very recent months come up to me and have like a lacking, I guess, a lacking development of their own personality, and that translates to how they articulate themselves. And so today was going to be more of like a self or like a step by step procedure as to how I think I've developed my own. Because I think the reason why I have such a high regard for finding your own voice to begin with is because I think a part of your identity, well, I guess it also differs between person to person, but the identity that you take up should be unique to you. It's a representation of both your ethics and morals, and how you present them dictates like how others can perceive you as that whole entity making up of those different dimensions. So that's why I think it's important, and why I think other people should also be on board with finding who they are and what they represent, while also finding ways to communicate that to others. So other people have the opportunity to understand you at the maximum capacity that they should be able to. So in terms of the life catch up part, haven't been making content for the past 2 months, and I really thought, especially when I took a break from work, and I needed it. I wasn't being particularly productive at work for the most part during like October, November. So taking that break was I knew I needed to do something for myself, and I just never did it. So I shame on me for not like getting my act together and like go seeing someone who could help me like overcome the blocker that I was experiencing. At the same time, the work that I was doing wasn't very challenging. So it was just kind of mindless work, but I was lacking in discipline when it came to I was lacking in discipline when it came to being present at my job. And that's not to say that I wasn't doing the work that I needed to. It's more just mentally, I wasn't all there as I was like on hours. So that's kind of what was happening back in November. And so even though I promised that I'd get like more content out, I just felt like I was reversing backwards in terms of personal growth. So there was no reason for me to come out and share my voice, at least for me. Like I didn't feel like I needed to while I was up here, especially considering I see this platform as a place for others to draw on like other ideas. And I didn't feel like I had ideas worth sharing because other parts of my life wasn't going very well. And I didn't feel like my own voice would be worthwhile to anyone. So, um, yeah, through that, I felt like nothing was like my creativity was kind of on the way down. I didn't feel like I had anything to talk about or anything useful to talk about for that matter. So, but now we're back. I don't know if we'll have like more content throughout the next couple weeks. The thing that I promised myself was to not promise anything. So instead of just having like, we're gonna, or instead of just saying I'm gonna have like a podcast next week or in the next 2 weeks, I'm not gonna set that expectation for myself. But I hopefully will have more content moving forward. So the way that this podcast came to be in the first place, I've been meaning to make this one for 3 weeks. I finally sat down at work because I was actually becoming productive again. I disciplined myself in a lot of dimensions that would benefit my work balance. So I went into work, gave myself some time to create this outline for finding your voice. And I think I actually had it made Thursday, one time this week, but it was definitely before yesterday when I had posted it. And I like added a couple more touches for the outline today because I felt like it needed some conclusive elements to it. I think it was mostly just personal anecdotes that, I mean, and that's normally okay, but I think it needed more if I wanted to be proud of coming out with this podcast for today. So, huh. Let's see what else. Work obligations, poor work ethic, and bad discipline. Yeah, I already spoke on that. Um, so I guess a lot of the reform that's happened in the past 2 months. I guess you should know that since it's mostly been on a backwards trend, my physical and mental health has also been in similar fashion to that. So starting off, well, normally I'm not about the resolutions at New Year's, but it kind of happened that way with my weight loss 2 years ago. So in a similar fashion, I'll probably be trying to lose weight. I have a watch that I've been heavily reliant on at the moment, and it can take measurements of like physical activity and whatnot. So it's been nice because it gives me reminders of being active, I guess. And it's been also nice because I've been getting notifications from my phone to my watch too. So that's a nice quality of life change instead of me just looking at my phone all the time. Other life news, my cat recently passed about like 2 weeks ago. I was pretty sad. It was what, the second day after, so it was January 2nd, and my cat of since elementary school has finally passed away. She's escaped death like a lot of times. So yeah, that sucked. That was like the most emotional I think I've ever felt in in the past like decade or so. No, that's not true. When I tried to kill myself, I was still pretty emotional then. But I think since even like that era, that depression era for myself, the cat passing was the hardest on me for a while. A couple other life news that also went bad on that same day. I'm not going to speak on those, but yeah, it was January 2nd was a shit day for me. Let's just let's just say that. Um, even though I kind of report that my life's been on the downhill recently, I will say I have made more friends. And we'll see if I stick around those people for long. We'll see if I continue to make new friends or what. I'm not sure yet. My network's just like growing and just losing people from the network at the same time. It's like growing and subtracting from itself at any point. And that's just people coming and going. It is what it is. Like, I don't even know what I bring to people anymore, which is why like finding your voice was part of the topic today. Because I think part of the reason why you'd want to develop that in the first place is to have like a stance, make your own unique stance to people and to people who are willing to listen. But eventually, not everyone's willing to listen, so it's hard to value even if your own voice is worthwhile to others anymore. So, but I don't know. You still got to find that confidence that it's worthwhile, even to somebody, and that's kind of the whole reason why healthy dialogue started in the first place. It's because here I feel like I can just run my mouth off on anything, and have the similar approaches into how I conduct myself in approaching those ideas. And it's the procedure at which I generate the thoughts pertaining to that is why I think listeners come and go from, I guess, this podcast and the community as a whole. So I always thought that healthy dialogue was like a procedure in how you develop your own understanding about understanding and interpretation of other people's ideas or your own, and how you make sense of the feelings that you have and the expressions that other people use, and making sense of the science, even though I feel like there's less science here and more just feeling. Um, so even though I'm making new people, and they're usually coming and going, I have actually made a addition to the community. Great friend of mine. We'll see. We'll see if we stick it out. I'm hopeful that things will, or that we'll still like continue to like see each other per se, or like chat with each other. But who knows? I might go visit. I need to visit a lot of people of the crew. So I've yet to visit Isabel, who's been on here every once in a while. Um, yeah, and they're just all across like the U.S. West, and I've been meaning to meet all of them. I've met some of them, but not all of them. Some of them even live in Washington, in like the area of Washington that I'm from, and I still have yet to go see them. So hopefully that'll be a change in the future. In terms of like healthy dialogue content. So, as I said before, I know I'm not gonna leave up expectations that I don't feel like that I'm not confident enough to deliver on. So, I think at this point, whatever happens with content is just whatever happens with content. And I know Alon's always on the lookout for music discussions, though. In recent, he's been out with the crew almost every weekend, but I do know that he stays home like every once in a while, so he might be interested in doing something. Otherwise, I think it'll just stay as me usually. No problem with that. Okay. But yeah, if other people, well, okay, I know some of my friends listen to the show every once in a while, and if you're listening now, feel free to come up here, because a lot of the discussions that I try to have usually work best when it's with someone else. And I know the people that I surround myself with are very capable and competent, articulate beings. They're great. And that's why I like surround myself with them. They can understand what I say, they can generate their own thoughts, and I can understand what they have to say too. And that's like who I just choose to surround myself with. So I know their perspectives don't always align with what I have to say, but it is refreshing to hear it from someone else, more so than it is just me being a echo chamber for myself in these podcasts. Okay, so I think that's taken care of all the life stuff that's happened, at least for me. Um, yeah, so just I guess a recap, turning things around for myself, looking up, seeing some progress. Gonna try and stay on track, but I'll give like another update the next time I come out with the podcast. So, all right, moving on to the main stuff, finding your voice. So I wasn't planning on making this like a lecture kind of podcast, because I wanted to have like some discussions, but maybe I'll just discuss with myself the different ideas that present, and then just comment as I go. So I think there will be parts where there is like lecture moments, and I'm sorry for that. Um, but I guess in the way that I present my own ideas, I have to convince myself that the different things, the different ideas that I have, are worth believing in. And I think lecturing about them to myself is how I convince myself that they're right, or at least somewhat truthful to them. Anyways, so as I said recently, or for like my recent months, I guess, I've had feelings where like my voice wasn't worthwhile for the world to hear. And I'm starting off with that because I think that's a normal experience everyone feels. And maybe they even feel that, maybe they don't even get past that. And I believe at one point I held that mentality about myself for a long time. And I think you can actually connect that to how people view voting. And I think it wasn't until like what, 2016 or 2020 where people thought that their voice didn't matter in politics, which there's a lot of conflicting evidence about whether it is or not, but I'm not going to go into that. But the point is that people didn't really care about their own voice because they had some sentiment that it wasn't worth hearing. And regardless of whether or not it was like unique enough, it was more just out of the population, like you're a voice out of 300 million. In contextual, in context to like the US and people who can vote. So you're one amongst the masses with like not what could you possibly present that would be unique or worthwhile to hear when there's like several millions of people, hundreds of millions of people who can either say the same thing but better, say like the opposite thing or whatnot. You just know that you're being represented in the kinds of voices amongst the demographic that you're a part of. So you could say the same thing about like my voice per se. Like my voice isn't necessarily worth listening to even now. Um, which I somewhat believe. Like, there's definitely other people who can speak on behalf of the topics and ideas that I have. That it's not like unique. Other people can speak on it. It's just I happen to have a specific value and ethical makeup at this present time, and I'm willing to speak on behalf of different things that I want to speak on behalf of. So, do I feel empowered by capitalizing on the opportunity to speak on behalf of what I think? Maybe, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's actually just all like a maybe this is an exercise of me trying to convince myself that my voice is even worth listening to. But even though statistically you can definitely say that it's not. Um, but I think the best thing, like I wrote in my notes here as like a way to as a way to even convince myself during this podcast that it's worthwhile. It's that like you have to believe in your own voice yourself before other people can think that you're worth listening to. Um, and that's like the kind of confidence that you should instill, model, or sorry, yeah, no, not instill, but rather model for other people. So encouraging others to find what they're passionate about and speak on behalf of that. Start representing it because your voice is a representation of your values and beliefs. And that's why finding your voice is one of the utmost important things that you can do for yourself in social representation. Um, wow, I'm surprised I came to that conclusion. Anyways, I was supposed to talk about why your voice isn't worthwhile for the world to hear. And some people want to suppress the voices of others because they're like derogatory or discriminatory in nature. So in the notes that I have listed right after that is like being openly racist or like discriminatory. And the reason why those voices want like the reason why people try and suppress those voices of hate is because they think it's like a weaponizing technique for the person who's spreading it to enable others who just want to be hateful in nature. And I don't know whether it's wrong or right to do that. I do know that the representation needs to happen before the platform of representation goes beyond just vocal text communication. And I think you see that this is completely off note of what I was thinking of when I was writing this outline, but I guess you could also like combine that with how people do riots and protests. They do these different events in masses to be heard on another level when their individual voices and representation isn't good enough. Their normal means to representation isn't good enough. So they find more drastic means to have their voice heard, um, in a way that they know, in a way that they are hoping to achieve representation. And unfortunately, I think like shootings in America is often a problem, but you hear from like it, from psychologist inspired, it's not inspired, like psychologist advised like notes of you don't want to say like the shooter's name because it'll give them like the reputation that they're looking for. And I guess in some ways that's akin to having their voice heard, being represented, their ideas represented through a means that is honestly horrific. But it's pretty bad. And I think if you negate the different methods at to which people will try to share their ideas, it's going to come out in different methods you didn't even think of. So, one of the reasons why I think like school shootings or just shootings in general is like terrible. And say if you were to like give everyone a gun or do the opposite on the political spectrum, which is take away all the guns. Like if you eliminate different methods to expression, another expression that may be more horrific may come in its place. And that's like, to me that's like the horrifying news about like suppression or suppressing different methods to emotion or to voices or to their voice. Wow, that went in a direction I did not expect it to. Anyways, trying to get back on track. I think the reason why you downplay your own voice is because other people don't believe it's worth listening to. And rather, that's your interpretation as to how others listen to your own voice. And that's not, I think that's fair. Like, I think your voice, the perception of your own voice is valued at who is willing to listen. But like social media, I think you need to come to closure about what your voice means to you. And that's what's going to perpetuate your confidence in your engagement with not only your voice but social media in like similar fashion or from the metaphor. So, and I think there is like self-importance to having your own defined voice in those moments, as already listed from before. We'll go over those again. Those are in the notes too. Okay. Some people. Okay. I'm surprised my notes went this direct. I should have. Wow, my note taking is actually shit recently too. Damn. Okay, so the direction at which I was gonna go with these next set of notes was that very recently I've been in contact with a few new friends, and some of them are very terrible at text communication, but in person they're expressive and do very well at communicating their ideas by the different gestures that happen only in like in-person communication. So they're incredibly good at in person and suck at text communication. And so when I was trying to text communicate with them, I had a hard time trying to understand what they meant with certain tones of, or yeah, with certain phrases and whatnot. The clarity in which they were using words had like no tone or like contextual understanding that you would get out of in person like communication. And that is a problem of the platform, but I think to some degree each and every person, if they're going to use like text platform communication, need to develop their own identity into how they use those platforms to portray as much clarity about their position as they would as if they were in-person communication. And so I think that's why I've spent a lot of my time developing my own text communication and in person. Though I would even say that my in person is worse. I'm not a very expressive individual in person, but I am quite expressive like in text, and that's pretty bad. Yeah, I think it's more of just a capacity thing of like I can't feel sadness usually. Like the only time I really felt sad was when my cat died 2 weeks ago, and that felt terrible. Um, but yeah, like that was the only thing that really triggered me over the edge. But then again, I'm a pretty level-headed guy for the most part. But even then, like my peak happiness doesn't really show unless if I'm like on the floor laughing kind of deal. Like someone has to be so funny to me that I'm like actually expressing like laughter more often than that. So, yeah, some people really suck at text communication. Some people will even say words that they don't even mean. And I've had both of those cases happen with two different people in the past week. And it's frustrating knowing from other context clues of their voice that they didn't mean what they said and just trying to work around that separation and like trying to make the clarity into their voice, into the words that they say, that like, hey, you're not actually expressing this or that, you don't actually mean this, you don't believe in this. And to be in their defense, they were kind of at like a peak stress moment, but I think in almost all cases you'd want to negate as much stress as possible to be level-headed in what you're saying and be accurate with how you're saying things. And honestly, in general, if someone who is not stressed at all, but will still not even say what they mean or can't use the words to say what they mean, I've lacked so much patience in handling those people that I might just I might just get out of there, out of that social situation. And like I've met people like that too, and it sucks. Sometimes you can't help it but need to be there. But I don't know. I should be more tolerant of those kinds of people anyways. All right. So I've hit the point where I'm supposed to, in my notes, where I'm supposed to like wrap everything together about like why your voice is important. Um, I've already spoken on behalf of these, I think, in other podcasts anyways, but the point of your voice being as accurate to yourself as possible and making sure that there's no disconnect between how you articulate your ideas and your ideas being true to yourself. Minimizing the gap in that will make you more dependable and reliable to other people. And I think that's why some people actually look up to me in being introspective, so much so that I can be dependable for them, and be like analytical in how I process through those own ideas of myself and then converting them into words that I say. Because I think other people would like to do that as well. It's a tough thing to do in general. I think that's why there's a whole psychology profession behind that, is making sense of the ideas that you have subconsciously and turning them into conscious thought. So it's definitely something that if you can take care for yourself, you'll be more heavily relied on if you can say what you mean and do what you mean when you say it. Second point. So I'd like to think every once in a while, may not be all the time, I'd like to think that my voice can actually make like somewhat of an impact in the representation of ideas and battles that happen between like morals, ethics, beliefs, and whatnot. So, say if there's like a discussion happening over, I don't know, trying to be brave and find the confidence in asking a girl out. Some people may say like one or two things about their own experience. I'll say my own one, two, three things about the experience too. Or like perhaps provide perspective that might be useful in providing confidence into said person who I forget the situation that I try to point out already. But the point is that the more details that you can more relevant details that you can bring into perspective may actually turn the tables of a decision about the situation in thought. So making sure that you can not only have the internal battle between the beliefs that you have yourself, but then also presenting like different perspectives on those beliefs, and being encompassing of the different ideas that you have and representing them in relevant discussion. Like that is a valid situation that probably happens to me more often than I'll give it credit to. Because most of the time I'm willing to just dismiss my own voice, but I think in a lot of cases when I do present my voice, it has some impact in the discussion and to the people who are present in that discussion as well. And then the last thing that I had about why your voice is important is because it allows you to portray your identity in a more upfront manner. Um, and actually, I might even go like back on this point and rewrite that because I don't think that's particularly right. I think the method at which I use articulate platforms or like communication platforms enables me to be like clear. So Alon like made like a statement about me like earlier this week about how when I talk, there's very little room for interpretation. And that's usually not the case with these podcasts because I feel like I leave out a lot of context clues. But I think most of the time during discussions, which this isn't, the clues into which I'm thinking about, if I say anything that's like kind of weird, it can be clarified almost instantly. Whereas a podcast platform of me just talking to myself is nothing ever gets clarified, which kind of sucks. But for the most part, I think when you're having discussions with other people and you're able to articulate your voice and your beliefs, values, ethics, whatever, the more you're able to maximize that, the better you are at representing yourself. Um, and that's my own belief about like verbal and text communication when you try to optimize that for presenting your voice. So, I'm gonna sit back up for a sec. Okay. So moving on past the reasons why your voice is important. I actually had the steps listed out for what you should do in order to find like your own voice. And the reason again why I think this is useful for other people or for maybe not the listeners here, but for like people in general. I think the steps will, well, that's not even true. I was going to say the steps might give clues as to how someone might be able to like develop themselves, but there's definitely many ways at which you can develop yourself. I think these are the ways that I've done it for myself though. So, with the first step, it's understand your values. And I don't know if it's particularly in my place to say that like you need to that your values are underdeveloped at the moment, but I do think that there's always capacity to grow. Your values have like different beliefs that are always at head with each other. And I think they all also always change. So between like growing your ideas either passively and knowing that like one day your values are going to switch from one thing to the other, I think also developing them just so that they're like as clear to you in vision and how you believe that the value should be placed as in terms of its hierarchy of your own values. I think the more you're able to define that, the better place you'll come from articulately in trying to describe that value. So as I already said, everyone kind of has a hierarchy of ethics and morals that they live by already. But you want to develop the value as much as you can and understanding your place about that specific value, what you stand up for, what you don't stand up for, like how are the little nuances in perhaps different situations where values are clashing against each other, like where does it stand. And I, as I already said, I think the more you develop that, the better chance you're going to have at knowing how to speak on behalf of how you are to like present yourself over that value. I also know there's plenty of people out there who change values all the time, and I think that's okay. What you're able to present one day versus another day shouldn't be like a criticizing point of view. Like I could hold Alon something, or like yeah, I could hold something against Alon for a long time, but if he's like switched in values and stance about a particular idea, then who cares, you know? Just because he believed in one thing for a while doesn't mean that like I should be criticizing him again for it now when he believes in something different. Yeah, you can make fun of him for it, but it's not like something you can hold over someone's head. Like a racist, for example, like a open extremist, whatever. You can hold that over their head for a while, but who they are today, if they've made that like the adequate change, should be recognized as someone who's made like progress since the previous problem idea. And then that comes to the the situation of, well, what about, let's say we're talking about a pedophile. Would you still hold the same like forgiveness in switching beliefs or switching like values if they switch from like pedophilic behavior to just like normal behavior? I think it's commendable that they've swapped, and I think if they made like the lawful okay, say if they like acted upon the pedophilia, like yeah, that'd be pretty bad. But and I think they should pay the time if they did something illegal about it. But if they made the change, I think they're still worthwhile as a person to listen to or to have like value. Anyways, I was a little sidetracked. So the first step, as I listed, understand your values. If you need to develop them further. Values can change. That's all okay. So the second step after you have like a fundamental value system is developing a means to communicate your values. And for me, I already expressed I do it verbally. I also do text communication, whatever. Since most of my interactions, human interaction, is like on Discord anyways, like all I do is just I see someone else's like profile bubble and then I just talk into a mic and somehow we're able to communicate with each other because I hear voices back. But yeah, I feel like the words that I say in conversation is usually relevant. I can understand and listen to how someone else can present their own values and ideas, but I've also dedicated a significant amount of time of being able to like communicate my own ideas to others. And sometimes the communication gap is all there or is like isn't there, and then other times it is. Even between me and Alon, we have like a couple communication gaps every once in a while with things that I say. And maybe I misinterpret things that he says too, but I'm very aware of when like he interprets something wrong and I can't understand if that's either my own presentation or if that's him making sense of the words I said and interpreted something different. So there's always a method into which you can communicate it, but also realize that like someone else receiving it may not understand you in the way that you mean. So there's many different methods to expression. I already listed mine. So I think some of the well-known ones is like art. So there's musical art and there's like visual arts. There's writing, like you can write in a diary if you want to. And that's just like writing to yourself and jotting down different things that you feel like sharing in just a diary that you know won't be seen by other people. There's also text communication. You just chat with people virtually. There's books, which I think is like, well, historically probably the most common use of of expressing like either ideas or just history. So we've known that for a long time. Then there's as the upcoming modern ages of technology keep expanding into different methods of portraying your voice, we have social media. And then, of course, verbal communication, just being face to face with someone, or even like voice comms. That works too. I think the problem with social media nowadays is that you feel even less that your voice is worthwhile since everything is normally just a noise chamber through social media. I guess in some ways you could say that this podcast is like me being able to spread my voice some way. But I think the aims of this podcast was more of why this platform was started in the first place. So hopefully I'll be able to, I don't know. I'd like to be able to share that with other people, but so far it's just been me just talking to myself usually. The diary part, I used to do diary entries like daily 2 years ago, just about. Yeah. And I know Alon's kept up with that daily as well. So just the point of like the second point of developing a means to communicate your values is to like maximize your method and how you portray your ideas and values. So try to make the most out of whatever platform you want to use, or every platform in that matter. I know my oddly enough for me to say this too. I should have done this in like the introductory part too, but I've noticed a decay in like my own voice. So as I'm like speaking on behalf of different things, I know that like I'm losing cognitive function as I'm speaking about stuff. Whereas like a year and a half ago, I felt like I could speak on behalf of anything and be like fluent, somewhat fluent in the things that I said. There was like a peak in where I could just talk about anything and have like zero insecurities about how I talked. Now I'm kind of back at a place where if I speak about something, and I'm just gonna have like pauses throughout all of it. And even in this podcast, I think that was shown as well. So yeah, a little bit of a side note, but I think if I were to optimize my verbal communication again, I'd have to practice more, which I don't think I've had a whole lot of opportunities to within my friend groups. But I knew this podcast in particular used to give me the practice that I needed. So maybe maybe I'll make this more of a habit again. Okay, so first step, understand your values, develop them as much as you can. They can change, whatever. Second step, find a platform in which you would be able to spread your ideas and your identity. And then the third one would be to interact with others. So not only practicing like the social media stuff and then like the text communication, you can practice that all you want with whoever. But I think the third part of that is spreading your identity to other people. And so the reason why I like started Healthy Dialogue is because I knew that I can improve my values, my set of values, develop them as much as I can, and also increase my capacity for using the different platforms to spread my ideas through conversation. And so usually when I go up to my friends and I have like an idea to present and I present it as like an open discussion. Usually that's an opportunity for them to all like give me feedback or new ideas about how I should reshape my value system, reshape how I talk to them about my value system, and give like some insight as to perhaps what I should do about the situation that I give to them. Maybe they have something relevant, maybe they don't. It doesn't matter. It's an opportunity for you to grow in the different dimensions at which your voice can be improved, or that will all improve your voice. And that's why I like talking to people on like on like a deep level most of the time. If I see the potential in that my ideas would be like reciprocated well, or like the open discussion invitation will be like met, then I'll provide other people with that invitation. Perhaps I don't do it enough, because I know that like if someone were to if someone were to present an opportunity to me about that, I'd be very happy that they would do it. So I probably need to talk with people more. It's like the realization that I'm coming to, because even though like me as someone who's initiating the discussion about like a particular idea that I have, like I know I'll get something out of it, but as someone who's been invited to that opportunity, I also know that I've gathered understanding as the takeaway from that opportunity. So it's a mutually beneficial opportunity to grow in whatever way that you want to take away from the discussion. So, but I think you can really only have that if you have the substance of ideas and values that you go into that discussion with. And that's not to say that you like maybe you can't, but I think you get more out of it the more you have defined within yourself. So the more that your identity is defined, and the better communication methods that you have, the more that you take away, the further along like perfection and growth you go when you have those interactions. There's a couple there's a couple problems with that, as I've listed in my notes, and one of them is not everyone is open to interacting with you. I get it. Sometimes what I have to say is like inappropriate for like our relationship. I had that happen like once this week, and I'm like I'm like somewhat embarrassed about it, but I'm not that embarrassed to like beat myself up over it. It's like something I made a mistake once. I don't know if I'll do it again, kind of thing. Like I tried it just to make sure that like I got my voice out there. I've been like I properly represented myself, and now I know like what the consequences of doing that was in like an inappropriate setting. So, yeah. Possibly never again until I have the ballsy confidence again. Um, but even though like some people may not be open to interacting with you, um, I think you just got to find the people who are willing to humor you and what you have to say. And that like takes some time and dedication to develop relationships with others, but I think once you get to that point, I think you can start introducing the opportunity to grow together, and ideally it should work well with whoever's accepting of that. And for me, that's like my preferred choice of growing is through the people that I trust and confine my identity to. And they trust and confine their identity to me when we have ideas and when we share when we share words about how we think about those ideas and each other's ideas. It's great. So, I guess the last point that I have in here is communication gaps are a big problem, especially if people haven't developed their own methods. So, yeah, know the capacity at which other people have developed their own identity and their own words or like communication methods. And so, I would try and keep like a high bar for whoever you surround yourself with to be like on par with you in terms of communication and your own voice development. And I feel like I can confidently say that the people that I choose to be with are all people who know how to communicate and bounce ideas off of me while also giving me opportunities to bounce ideas off of them. Whew. Wow, I'm surprised. I'm surprised. I'm surprised I made it this far. I think I'm done with all that since I've gotten to the end of my notes. Um, but yeah, please feel free to tell me what you think. I think this podcast, in terms of content, went pretty all right. So far, we've gone for like 52 minutes. Wow, that's pretty wild. Longer one at that. I was not expecting this to be that long, but I guess I did have a lot to say since it's been 2 months, but here we are. So as I mentioned at the front, or at the beginning of the podcast, I don't really have an expectation for myself as to when the next one will come out, but I do want to start making a habit about coming and having shows again, because I think it kept my verbal communication fresh. Whereas I feel like it's been slowly slipping away from me. So I'll find stuff to talk about. It also will be something that I can discipline myself over too. So that's also something as well. But other than that, I think I'm going to call the podcast a day. And I'll see you whenever the next time will be. Thank you for listening.